has been taking some few changes during the last few years. Not only we live in a complex world that leads us to multiple layers and international transactions, but world changes. COVID-19 and ongoing wars and other tensions also shift a little this reality that we know. Today, we're going to try and examine the world as we know it with our global value chains and try to highlight some points of view that we all, as cooperative members and representatives, should notice. I would like to start with inviting for the opening and welcoming remarks, Professor Hans Groeneveld, Director International of Cooperative Affairs in Rabobank, the Netherlands, and the ICETT Chairperson. Thank you, Hans. Welcome.
Thank you, Miraf. Good night, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Also, on my behalf, I have the honor to open this highly interesting webinar about a topic that affects all of us, I would say, not just cooperatives, but everybody around the globe, I would say. It's also a very broad topic that we would like to discuss this afternoon. So, preparing and restructuring global value chains. Well, we all are confronted with the issues, I would say. First of all, obviously, there's a huge gap between the demand for products and services and the supply due to value chain disruptions caused by COVID-19 and economic lockdowns, where people didn't spend anymore. There was no demand, so production processes were stopped, were halted, or scaled down. And the very moment that the lockdowns were lifted, well, the consumer demand or demands will increase tremendously again, but the capacity couldn't keep up because the value chains were broken or disrupted, and that's why we see the impact of this as well around the globe, leading, for instance, to rising prices, because there's an imbalance between demand and supply. That was the first shock hitting the system and affecting global value chains. Then, of course, a long-standing issue, and it's becoming more and more urgent to address this issue, is, of course, climate change, and especially for cooperatives, which are, well, many cooperatives are active in the food and agricultural sector. No need to tell you that, well, climate change will affect particularly the global food chain and F&A sector. So many cooperatives will be affected by climate change as it is, not just via the value chains, but also, of course, due to all kinds of disturbances and extreme weather conditions resulting from this climate change. We have to address and we have to find a solution for this. Cooperatives play an important role, as I said, because they are, well, many cooperatives are active in the F&A sector. And there it's a question how to be sustainable, produce sustainable, but also how to keep alive the value chains that are there, or to restore the value chains, which were disrupted again by the COVID-19 crisis, but also by the climate crisis. And on top of this, we have a third factor impacting on the global value chains. Fortunately, this is the horrible war going on in Europe, which affects, obviously, well, the energy prices, but also, again, the global food chain, because, as you know, Ukraine is a very important player in the field of exporting wheat and cereals. So this geopolitical aspect is also very interesting and very important to all of us, I would say. So I'm very curious to hear, well, what the discussions this afternoon would have to say about all these challenges affecting the global value chain. And it's, of course, a very broad and multifaceted concept, not just in the agricultural sector, but all kinds of sectors. How cooperatives can play a role in smoothing or repairing or making these global value chains work better in the future. Keeping in mind, and under the condition, take into account that steps have to be taken to increase the sustainability of these global value chains, not just in terms of environmental aspects, but also social aspects, because, well, the effects of these disturbances are not distributed equally, I would say, across the world. And cooperatives could play a role there as well. So it's a very broad topic. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. And as you might know, the International Cooperative Entrepreneurial Think Tank, which I have the honor to share, is a mouthful, addresses all these issues, global and overarching issues that pertain to many cooperatives at the same time, and hopefully also for your cooperative. This seminar, this webinar will yield interesting insights and relevant insights around this very important topic that is there to stay for the coming time, for the coming years, I'm afraid. So please, Mirav and Marjaana, who did a lot of work on this, as a subgroup, working group of the ICETT, I'm very curious to hear your findings, but also looking forward to the discussions with all of you. Thank you very much. Enjoy this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans. In order to sort of frame ourselves, the purpose of this webinar, a little background, I'm honored to invite Ms. Marjaana Saarikoski. Marjaana is the leader of the ICETT working group on human rights and value chains. She represents the Finnish cooperatives at the board of the International Cooperative Alliance since 2017. And she's also the vice president of Eurocoop, the European Community of Consumer Cooperative. Welcome, Marjaana, and thank you.
Thank you, Mirav, and welcome all to our webinar also from my side. And good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are. Our theme today, as mentioned, the role of cooperatives in creating ethical and sustainable value chains is even more relevant today than it was when we started to plan it. We know that sustainability is part of the DNA of a cooperative, and a quarter in a cooperative means 25 years, not 3 months. But how to maintain the added value of a cooperative business model in ever-changing world? As Hans mentioned already, the global climate change and COVID-19, they were there when we started to plan this webinar. After that, we got the conflict in Ukraine, which is now the war, and the rising inflation after that. So they are all some of the main reasons for disruptions in value chains globally. But we have today speakers from different stakeholders of the food value chain, especially from agriculture to consumption, and we hope that these interventions will be useful for your cooperatives. This topic, inclusive global value chains, will be one of the priorities of the G20 countries next year. One of the key engagement groups of the G20 is B20, and it will be focusing on the inclusive global value chains for resilient global trade and investment, for countries to build the resilience to structural economic shocks arising from supply chain disruptions. And ICA and its members are planning to take part in the G20 discussions in 2023 under the Indian G20 presidency. So therefore, this theme is very relevant to us, and it will stay on the agenda even in the future. And with these words, I will pass the floor to Mirav again. And please enjoy, we hope that you enjoy our webinar. And please be active on chat also.
Thank you, Marjaana. So now we've heard about the concept of value chains, but in order to discuss and to our inner depth the status of global value chains and their implications on our daily life, I would like to give the stage to Mr. Edgar Aguilar from the International Labour Organization based at the Regional Office for Africa. Mr. Aguilar supports the financial sector to contribute to ILO decent work agenda. He also provides technical support to the Excel Africa project on financial innovation, working at the intersection between financial inclusion and rights at work. Mr. Aguilar has over 9 years of field experience developing financial services for smallholder farmers and related value chain actors. He has supported the ILO Impact Insurance Facility, designing holistic risk management solutions for agriculture value chains, and also worked with private financial institutions in Ghana and Mozambique in the microfinance industry. Welcome and thank you, Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Merav, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I will share my screen. I hope it works. Please let me know. I'm putting full screen now. And sorry, so it works, yes? Perfect. So thank you for the invitation, and it's really a great opportunity for us also to showcase what we are doing at the International Labour Organization. I'll be presenting today a bit on an overview on what is happening in terms of the global value chain disruptions, but I will insist maybe in highlighting more on the role of cooperatives that have to play in repairing and restructuring the value chains, as I think most of us, we are quite familiar with the different problems, right? I picked one example of one of the projects we are implementing in Africa. So this project is the ILO Axel Africa project, which is funded by the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, that has been implemented since 2019. The project has this overarching goal to accelerate the elimination of child labor in Africa in selected supply chains. That's also why I picked this project, as we can see this both, I mean, the combination on the disruptions on the economic side, but also on the social issues. As we may know, child labor is a result of various decent work deficits that go beyond poverty, vulnerability, lack of social protection coverage, weak representation of workers at the very lower tiers of different supply chains, and of course, a quite crucial point, gender inequality all along the chains in these global supply chains. We have concrete experience working in 6 countries and 5 supply chains. We covered in relations to agricultural value chains, cocoa, coffee, tea, and cotton, that in some countries are well known to be exposed to some of the social risks as child labor and other kind of human rights violations. And also we focused on the mining sector, working on gold mining, artisanal mining, where there is also a lot of social issues on those supply chains. To give you a bit on this overview, I think it was mentioned that we don't only refer to the pandemic, but we also speak about climate change, conflicts and crises, as it was in the case of the countries where we're covering, like Mali, like Nigeria, like Uganda, where there are also other kind of conflicts and crises at the country level. So in terms of disruptions, first of all, what we saw are that to operate, it's more costly now. It costs more to operate. So it can be from the sourcing operations to source from a very remote area to export it to Europe or to the US or to other importing countries. And also it's more costly to serve the needs of the populations in terms of services, because due to all these crises. Second, related also to the pandemic, but also to climate change, we see some movement in terms of workers. Due to lockdown, for example, it was quite difficult for workers to go to their workplace, to generate their income, to work. It was also difficult for employers and companies to find available labor force to carry out the different operations that are needed. In terms of climate change and conflicts, also that push people to change from location, which I mean also increases a number of human rights violations. And then the third point is related to I mean the vulnerability side of workers, meaning on their health conditions, their safety and health conditions, on how in the terms of the pandemic, most of workers, I mean, got sick, lost even their lives, and that also impacted the labor force availability for different value chain actors. The fourth point, of course, in terms of the production, I mean, because there is less labor force available, it is more expensive to operate. Of course, that has impacts in terms of quality and how we are producing our produce. And then finally, which was quite or highly observed by the Axel project, Axel Africa project, was how a school closure impacted not only the lives of children that now were exposed to child labor because their labor force now was more available at the household level, but also impacted the lives of women as they had to balance their, of course, their economic activities and the different household chores as it is child care. So by saying this, I want to say that the disruption has not only reduced productivity or incomes, but has also exacerbated different social risks that were already present, as well as human rights violations, as I was mentioning in terms of child labor, forced labor, but also different cases on gender-based violence. So that's kind of the problems we see and how we see that we can play an active role in terms of the solutions. We have tested a number of models on how cooperatives can be more innovative in increasing access to services. So what we have done is that using the supply or the value chain structure, the one that is used to source the produce from a community to a city or to another country, how we use the existing structure to also offer and deliver services. So how cooperatives can deliver services to communities, to cooperatives members by establishing some partnerships. And this is, I think, a key word in sense on how we can build sustainable business models. So far, we have seen that cooperatives in the aim to respond to their members' needs, they try to play the role of service providers, but they don't have the mandate nor the expertise to do so. What we have explored is how cooperatives could partner with those service providers, meaning in the sense of private providers like input providers, financial institutions, but also public service providers as those institutions providing social protection schemes, and how these partnerships were supported by other value chain actors as the buyers, as the exporters, processors, in the sense that the service delivery could be improved. In few words, what we have identified as the role of the cooperatives in the sense of improving the livelihoods and working conditions of their members and the communities was, first of all, through the value chain, bringing new actors, bringing service providers, bringing partners that can offer with them these services. Second, increasing access to those services. Of course, at the level of the partnerships, the cooperatives, as they represent their members, they can be in a position to adapt the services to the living conditions and to the conditions of their members, which has an impact in the accessing piece that cooperatives played a role in building awareness, sensitizing on what is the service about, how does it work, how much do I need to pay for that. And this is the third point on how cooperatives also explored financing mechanisms for their members to access those services. It could be cash flow products, it could be loans, it could be even also managing the different premiums that cooperatives members could benefit from a certification scheme that farmers could use to cover the cost of those services. Fourth, it was also, as cooperatives have the mandate, of course, to represent their members, it's also to raise the voices in terms of the experience. I mean, we're increasing access to a service. Is this working? Is this not working? What should be improved? And this is how cooperatives, in collaboration with the service providers and the different partners, put in place some grievance mechanisms to collect the clients and the members' experience that then later influence again the product design, the service design. So in this kind of really small and short slide, I wanted to present what we have been testing in different countries on how cooperatives were playing the role to increase access to services that from one side could increase productivity, but also incomes for their members, but also incorporating mitigation measures to reduce social risk, as I mentioned, child labor or gender-based violence. Finally, this was not, of course, something that cooperatives were alone able to do. So we also offered a capacity building program on how, for example, set up partnerships. I mean, to whom to partner, how to deal with the partnerships. And it can be with the value chain actors, but also with service providers. Cooperatives also needed to improve their management systems, their governance systems to now manage a new service to be offered by, they're structured. Also, we mobilized one of our toolkits on how to raise awareness for the cooperative members on how to eliminate child labor, but as an entry point to address not only this human rights violation, but also many other ones that are existing. So we could, at some point, integrate a discussion on how this was affecting the operations of the cooperative to then find those sustainable solutions. And finally, a coaching and mentoring process was needed to be with them all along the process, so then can they later keep offering the services to their members. I think I will stop here now. So thank you, and then glad to have your questions and answer to all of them a bit later. Thanks. Over to you, Merav.
Thank you, Edgar. Joseph, do we have any question that is specific on Edgar's presentation?
From the chat we have not received. But yeah, there's a question that we had received from one of the participants on email. Just to read it. How can cooperatives and workers' unions work together to promote respect for human rights in value chains? I think that can be addressed from your presentation. You have already touched a bit about this. This is a question that we had received before the start of the webinar. How can cooperatives and worker unions work together to promote respect for human rights in value chains?
I go now with that. Yes. Okay, let me share with you a very concrete example that we are implementing in Côte d'Ivoire. As I mentioned, I think, the farming conditions are not the best. So workers, they don't want to be there anymore, right? Youth, we see a really young population in Africa. They don't want to be, doing this kind of hard work, okay? So what we have seen is that workers don't tend anymore to offer their services individually, as they have less bargaining power. For example, in how much they should be paid to conduct one activity, or even if they will be sure that the employer or the farmer will pay to them. So what we have identified in the field is that these workers are creating group of workers. So they can offer their services, their labor force services, in as a group. So they have then more power to bargain and to be sure that they will be paid. And this is how then we engage with the workers' unions to support those existing workers' groups to know a bit more on their rights. They were already offering this service as it was a need at the community level, let's say, but they knew a bit less on, in case of any problem, where to go, where to complain. And this is how the unions, by supporting the workers' groups, they were also bringing a new partner to the cooperatives, as the cooperatives were the ones introducing those group workers to their farmers. So even the cooperative was the one saying that you offer your labor services and the cooperative will be paying on behalf of the farmer to the workers group. And then when the harvest comes, the cooperative will deduct these costs. So this is how, from one side, you see the economic side on how, they are offering a service. The cooperative plays a role, and the unions also played a role on how to, for them to know a bit more on their rights, their working conditions, even in promoting social protection, so they are covered if anything happens to them, and then also in sense on even OSH, like occupational safety and health practices for those workers to improve their working conditions. So I think that's kind of a model that we are experimenting here in Côte d'Ivoire, that I see that in other countries can be replicated, because there is this need, right, on how to improve the conditions of workers to operate in the agricultural sector. Thanks.
Thank you, Edgar. As we discussed and as you showed in your presentation, the scope of value chains, especially in the food industry, is quite a wide scope. It goes from the single farmer and the cooperatives, the agribusiness and cooperatives, up until the consumer cooperatives. So in order for us to examine a little bit more of cooperatives' experiences and responses, I would like to invite Todor Ivanov, the Secretary General of Eurocoop, the European Association of Consumer Cooperatives, uniting and representing 19 national organizations of consumer co-ops, predominantly active in food retail. As well, Mr. Ivanov is the Secretary General of Consumer Cooperatives Worldwide, the equivalent organization on a global level. And he manages both organizations, leads the advocacy and representation activities towards the EU and the UN institution, and constantly upscales membership added value through direct collaboration among national members in areas of shared interest and priority. Welcome, Todo.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you, Mera. Is the sound okay? Yeah, all right, perfect. In case there's any problem, let me know and I have a backup because I'm using wireless headphones, but sometimes you need to do wired technology, the good old-fashioned wired technology. All right, thank you very much, Mera, for this introduction. Yes, I am Todor Ivanov. I'm the Secretary General of Eurocoop. And because of an agreement between Eurocoop and the ICA, I am also managing the secretariat, the one-man secretariat of CCW. Marjaana Saarikoski is the Eurocoop vice president, but also member of the executive committee of CCW. So thank you very much, Marjaana, for this invitation, and Joseph as well. And I'm joined here by Eurocoop's communication manager, Annalisa, as well. Thank you very much, Annalisa, for joining. So in the 10 to 12 minutes that I have allocated now, which is about 10 because I've been speaking for 2 minutes, I would like to shed some light on, of course, consumer cooperatives have been managing and dealing with sustainability since forever, like any other co-op. But recently, our members started taking a more bold approach to the topic of sustainability. Before I go into the restructuring and restructuring of global value chains, I'm going to give a classical example of what a consumer cooperative can do in terms of international development. So we have Central England Co-op Society. This is the third biggest consumer co-op in the UK. Our member of Eurocoop and CCW, they have established just this year an international trading development fund focusing on Malawi, where they support farmers for sustainable growth, of course, by helping them and directly purchasing from them 13 products, amongst which you see here nuts, rice, ground nuts, water, and all that. Soon, tea and coffee are coming. The whole project is very business sound because it is financed by a contribution of the sales of these products back in the UK and the wider the sale a part of the sale of the wider fair trade range again in the UK stores of Central England. That makes, I mean, that proves that you don't need to only act like a charity and, you know, inject money until you know, you see your returns. You can actually see your returns and you can break even immediately so that the project becomes self-sustainable, which is quite good. The UK Co-op College is supporting in establishing the Federation of Cooperatives for Malawi, working with producers in organizing them in co-ops, obviously, developing work plans, training, governance mechanisms. And at the moment, Central England Co-op is using Eurocoop and CCW, looking for partnerships to expand the sales of these products in other stores outside of the UK. And therefore, the more sales, the more accelerated growth of the fund and more support for Malawi. So this is a classical case of what a consumer cooperative can do directly with the producer. But I would like to focus on the bold approach of consumer cooperatives when it comes to sustainability. And that is that obviously here you see the current value chain. You see from the farmer, it goes all the way to the consumer. But at the moment, the current value chain and all the policy and all the requirements and all the standards, they somehow leave out food waste. Yes, a lot is being done on food waste and food loss, especially in the European Union. They're almost finalizing their pan-European targets for the reduction of food waste and food loss, but it's a big problem. And we see that this is a problem which actually intensified during the COVID because more people staying at home, more purchases, more food was wasted. And now the disparity between the number of people who cannot afford a warm meal every 2 days, that's 88 million people solely in the European Union, cannot have access or cannot afford, they have access, but cannot afford a warm meal every second day. That number is rising, and in the same time, food waste and food loss is rising as well. So it's not a matter of quantity, that there is not enough food for everybody. It's just that there's a heavy disbalance in how we produce, package, ship, consume food. Therefore, what do consumer co-ops think about it? Not everyone, of course, but the majority of consumer co-ops. We think that optimizing the current value chain is not going to save the planet. Yeah, you can bring it, you can bring the current value chain from using resources for 5 planets to 2 planets, but you're still at 2 planets and we only have 1. So it's not really optimizing that we need, but rethinking, redefining, and restructuring, because otherwise the SDGs go out the window. Now, how to converge social and environmental responsibility with economic viability? This is the question, and the answer is, well, a transition from the current value chain into a sustainable food system, which is circular. And it actually was the circular principle that is the idea behind SDG 12. And this is what consumer cooperatives are thinking at the moment. Okay, the problem is an inefficient supply chain. How can we find a solution, or where can we find a solution? We need to, first of all, rethink, redefine, and restructure. So rethinking the current supply value chain into a system, from a linear concept to a circular concept. Nothing new. We've been talking about circular economy for more than a decade now. Then after we rethink it, we've already done that. We need to redefine. And here we get into the nitty-gritty stuff. Redefining the concept of value. At the moment, the concept of value is predominantly based on profit. So long as I buy one product from the producer and sell it onwards and I make a profit, that's value. Well, yeah, but where does the social and the environmental aspect? They're nowhere. At the moment, they're externalized. So with that, then after we redefine how to base the future system, we need to actually move towards establishing that system. So restructure the current value chain into a system by optimizing or by changing and creating new standards. That's where the European Union is really trying to do the dirty work, which is very needed. We need to eliminate the least sustainable business models, the least sustainable operations, and we need to fix the consumption, because the consumption is just, nowhere close to anything that needs to be. Once we redefine, if we successfully redefine, there's a lot of opposition already. We see that in the EU policy process, a lot of opposition. If we manage to redefine and restructure, that will internalize the current social and environmental externalities, and we move closer to a true price of the product, and hopefully a transition to the food system. Here is a map. So how do we see this visually? We have the food system, and from a consumer co-op perspective, we have our business side, because consumer cooperatives still have to be profitable to do whatever, like any other business. And then we also have a responsibility towards consumers and society, simply because the consumers are owners, they're our shareholders. And any consumer cooperative develops activities roughly around those two areas. So from the business side, this is the third level. You see a linear approach here. From the business side, you need to be profitable. That will allow you to have investments. Once you start investments in new operations, higher sustainability, uptake of sustainable practices in your operations, be they logistics, packaging, trade, whatever, then you start developing different tools targeting the consumer, simply because obviously the main responsibility with us is with the consumer. I've given here an example of the sustainability declaration I will run through shortly. So tools to allow the consumer to move towards more sustainable and healthy lifestyles, consume less or consume better, not so much less, but better, because there's a health aspect as well to consider, especially after COVID, and a lot of campaigns that we need to reach, because without the consumer, there is absolutely no transition. That's why the long-term priority for consumer cooperatives is a transition to sustainable food systems, no more chains. We obviously focus downstream and upstream. We work with producers, not only in international fund development funds, but also in our private label. You know that cooperative retailers have a private label like any other retailer, but the main responsibility is with the consumer. So without them, there's no sustainability, no transition, no anything. So this is why consumer cooperatives really invest on consumer information and awareness, simply because 55 to 60% of all the waste in the system is at household level. The consumers are doing that. All of us, each and every one of us, 104 participants on this seminar, hopefully not all 104 contribute to food waste, but you know, we really need to, it starts with us at home. Co-op Sweden have implemented a digital label called, I'll be very brief, I know I'm really stressing the time here, where it's called the Sustainability Declaration. And it is based on 10 key parameters developed not by Co-op in Sweden, but by WWF in Sweden, uniting the whole supply chain in Sweden. All the producers, you see Arla there, a massive agri co-op, but also Unilever. You know, producers, manufacturers, retailers, NGO, WWF. And these 10 key parameters are biodiversity, climate, soil fertility, water, chemicals, pesticides, eutrophication, animal welfare, working conditions, local population, and legality and traceability. Very important, traceability. Without traceability, you don't have anything. The Sustainability Declaration is a label, once again, an electronic label, which you scan with your phone when you're at the store, and you scan a specific QR code or a barcode of the product. And it's valid for all 17,000 food products that Co-op sells, not only private label, all of them. And you can scan any other product which is not private label sold in any other store in Sweden, simply because the whole supply chain in Sweden got together and implemented this sustainability declaration. However, what Co-op Sweden did was really a mobile app and the back office where they handle all the big data coming from obviously the different segments of the supply chain. It declares the product's impact according to these 10 parameters developed by WWF. It shows the complexity of the sustainability. Sustainability is extremely complex. Once you start targeting one aspect, another one goes out the window. So you really need to find the balance. And the solution that it's very hard to find solutions cross-cutting, but they are there. It took 2 years to develop, especially data collection and analysis of that data. And it allows Co-op in Sweden, particularly Co-op, to make more sustainable purchases and even implement sustainability criteria in the governance. So they've told their buyers that they will not source any product from any supplier who does not provide information according to these 10 parameters. If you don't provide information, Co-op in Sweden doesn't buy from you, regardless of who you are and where you are. And it is a tool for the consumer to make sustainable choices. The calculations of the sustainability impact are all audited by international organizations in close collaboration with FAO, World Bank, and all that. Now, the Co-op brand is, it's our business card for private label Co-op products that go the extra mile in terms of safety, sustainability, quality, information to the consumer, reasonable price, and fair relations along the supply chain. with this sustainability declaration, I would like to a few honorable mentions, because it's not only the sustainability declaration that I can present, but in this allocated time, I have to set only for this. But the co-ops in Finland, Marjaana's organization, the S Group, they have a wonderful mobile app where they give all the data in a simple manner to the consumers. According to each consumer's shopping basket, they see how much calories, it's called a calorie tracker or a food coach, how much salt, sugar, and fat you have bought with these products, and you see them on the left, color coded green and red and yellow. And they also have, I think in the same mobile app, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't really matter, Marjaana, they also give you the CO2 emissions of your shopping basket, so you can see how much you're contributing as a consumer to the CO2 emissions around the world. The Italian co-ops are very big on traceability. They vouch that 100% of their private label is 100% traceable, all their products, and that 90% are coming from domestic suppliers. The UK, to cut food waste and food loss, in the first 6 months of COVID, they ended their last minute deals where it's 3 for 1, 2 for 1, because they realize they get rid of the problem of food waste and loss in their store, but it goes down, it goes into the household, because someone buys 4 sandwiches but eats 2 and has to throw away 2. And instead of that, they started donating and beefed up their collaboration with food charities. And only in the 6 months, or the first 6 months of COVID, they donated 5 million meals. We're also very big, consumer cooperatives are very big on data. You can imagine all this shopping that goes to the mobile apps, all this data comes to the consumer cooperative. And now we're thinking whether we can say that co-ops around the world, not only in a specific country, are the business operator that does not sell your private data to other businesses like Amazon or Facebook or whatever. We actually use that data that we receive from you. We process it in the case of Finland, and give it back to you so that the consumer can lead a more sustainable and healthy lifestyle. Conclusions. There are so many other examples, but we must continue with the conversation. We don't need an optimization. We need rethinking, redefining, and restructuring. Co-ops are champions of sustainability. That is proven since 1844. We empower consumers and partner with producers. We, of course, like any other co-op, embed our business operations are embedded on values and principles. Digitalization unlocks the potential. A lot of cooperation is needed to scale up this innovation. So co-op to co-op, one of the objectives of this webinar. We need to define what food system actors are, and we really need to be talking to policymakers non-stop. It's actually my job. This is why I can speak so quickly and without stopping. And we must be mindful that competition is not sleeping. Carrefour, one example, is a private retailer, multinational. In many areas, they are considered the enemy or the bad guys, but they're doing incredible stuff in terms of sustainability, and they're a private business, so that is a threat to co-ops, because we can no longer just lay and say, yeah, but co-ops are so sustainable because it's in our principles. Well, yeah, but look at what the private retailer Carrefour is doing. They're investing billions in sustainability, doing incredible stuff. So we have to be mindful that competition is not sleeping, and we need quick and decisive action. I've taken a bit more time than allocated, but I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Todo. So we discussed the food system or the food supply system from the consumer cooperatives point of view. But what happens on the other side? What happens on the farmer side? And for that, I would like to ask John Suk Lee, a team head at the International Cooperation Office of National Agricultural Cooperative Federation in Korea, who served most of his career in the cooperative banking sector and holds a master's degree in economics from Yonsei University and a bachelor's degree in applied biology from Seoul National University. So we're talking here with a banking farmer or a farming banker. Welcome, Jung-Suk.
Thank you, Merav. Hello, everyone. I'm Jung-Suk Lee from NACF, Korea National Agricultural Cooperative Federation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make a presentation here today. There are three main things built in my presentation. First, introduction of NSF with value chain in agriculture. Second, disruption of the value chain due to various factors. And lastly, NSF response to that. Difference from Mr. Total Ivanov presentation, my presentation only covers just NSF examples. NSF is the federation of over 1,000 member cooperatives, and they have almost 2.1 million member farmers. As you can see, we are not just a simple federation organization, but we are carrying out various businesses through a number of subsidiaries. Our businesses are largely classified into agribusiness and financial business, and those are comprehensively coordinated through two holding companies. You can see many of them use the name of 농협 or NH. In Korean, 농 means agriculture and 협 means cooperative. So 농협 means agriculture cooperatives. Looking briefly at the financial group first, it conducts a wide range of businesses from banking to venture capital. They sometimes play the role of supplying funds directly to the agricultural sector, but mainly they support by returning profits, earning through competition with other commercial companies. I'd like to explain the agribusiness group along with the value chain. To produce, the farmer needs to buy fertilizer, seed, pesticide, and several farm equipment. And to sell their produce, they need processing and distribution. The subsidiaries of NH Agribusiness Group aim to provide total service for the farmer over the entire value chain. Due to time constraint, let's look at the issue of disruption of the value chain. First, I'd like to begin with the disruption caused by COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 has increased the demand for online shopping due to quarantine restrictions imposed in many countries and reluctance to crowd. As you can see from the chart, online retail sales grew 22% in 2020, while total retail sales declined slightly. Since the increase in online shopping is concentrated in a few big tech companies, such as Amazon, Alibaba, in Korea case Coupang, the profit portion of producers within the value chain tends to be greatly reduced.
Young-sok, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I will continue. Korea is in the position of an importer rather than an exporter in the agricultural products. So the border closure was a bigger problem on the supply side than on the distribution side. Due to the declining and aging rural population, a significant portion of the farming workforce has been dependent on foreign migrant workers. As foreign workers could not enter as planned, they have suffered from a serious labor shortage. Next is the disruption caused by climate change. As you know, climate change has a huge impact on farmers. Changes in temperature or precipitation may make them change the crops they grow. For example, Chinese cabbage and radish are important vegetables to Koreans because they are the main ingredient of kimchi. Highland cultivation is suitable for growing those produce. As you can see from the map, the amount of land available for highland cultivation is expected to decrease over time. In a few years, they will have to switch their crops to other crops, and kimchi manufacturers may look for other sources of quality produce. However, a more serious problem caused by climate change will be frequent natural disasters due to abnormal weather. Many natural disasters such as heat wave, cold waves, droughts, floods, and typhoons are suffering great damage all over the world. The concern is that natural disasters caused by climate change will become more and more severe if we continue to live as before. Now let's move on how NACF cope with the disruption of value chains. At first, NACF opened the online produce exchange and digital fulfillment centers. The best way to choose good produce is to see and taste it. However, during the pandemic, we experienced some market closure due to the spike in cases. So we collaborated with the government to open the online produce exchange for 3 kinds of produce: onion, garlic, and apple in 2020. The number of items has increased to 13 this year, and we aim to handle all items next year. And for the retail side, we upgraded our existing distribution infrastructure to a digital fulfillment center. Customers demand faster and faster delivery. To make a same-day delivery system, we have established 12 fulfillment centers so far. Unlike a simple warehouse, the fulfillment center has a system that enables not only storage, but also packaging and shipping at once. We are strengthening our cooperation with other online retailers, but also working on developing our own system. Because in the value chain, if the balance would be broken, the weaker have to pay a lot. Big tech companies in the distribution industry are putting all their energy into expanding their market share while enduring losses based on huge capital. After the competitors are gone, they will undoubtedly change their attitude. For profit, they will push the producer to the marginal limit. We believe we have to survive because we have to be the alternative for the farmers when the situation comes. Regarding the issue of the labor shortage, we increased the use of community service order workers. Community service order is a type of punishment that requires mandatory community service work without receiving money for a certain period of time. Typically, they fulfill community service orders by working in welfare facilities. However, in a pandemic situation, there was a great concern that they would become a spreader of virus. So in cooperation with the Ministry of Justice, we have greatly expanded the number of community service order workers serving in rural areas. This benefited both parties as we were able to alleviate the labor shortage problem, and they found a way to implement the community service order while reducing the risk of spreading the virus. And finally, the issue of climate change. Of course, this is not an easy problem to deal with. It would be best if we could prevent the damage of natural disasters. However, the word abnormal climate itself means that it is beyond our expectations. If it is a matter of human life, excessive preventive measures should be taken. But for the crops, economic feasibility must be considered. This is why we are working hard to increase the participation rate of crop insurance rather than prevention. Farmers were reluctant to buy insurance because they felt that insurance premium were needless costs. However, due to our continuous promotion, the insurance participation rate is steadily rising. Rather, now we have to worry about the deficit of 농협 insurance company. Other private insurance companies have given up selling crop insurance because of profitability, but 농협 insurance cannot stop selling because we believe it is essential for the farmers. Although insurance may not cover all damages, it can guarantee minimum decent life as a human. Due to the horizontally and vertically integrated structure, I think NACF can cope with the disruption of the value chain in a more diversified way. In addition, based on the lobbying power derived from the number of members, we can respond to various issues more effectively by drawing cooperation from the government and local government. What if NSF was a company rather than a cooperative? In the face of labor shortage, it is possible to reap high profits by preferentially matching manpower to farmhouses that offer high commissions like Uber. If there is someone who is in financial trouble due to a disaster, we would expand our business by purchasing their property at a bargain price. A disruption of the value chain will later be another opportunity to generate profits. And the result of that will never be for the majority of people. Therefore, I believe we need a cooperative as a business model for people, especially in time of crisis. NSF is not a typical cooperative, but the basis for decision making is the members, and our top priority is the development of farmers and rural areas. Thank you for listening. I hope my presentation will be so helpful to you.
Thank you very much, Yumsok. It was indeed an interesting presentation and enlightening. Joseph, before we move on, do we have any questions for our presenters so far?
Yes, I think on the chat we have a question from Gabriela that is addressed to Mr. Todor Ivanov. And Gabriela is asking, do you think that a cooperative labeling, meaning certifying the origin from cooperatives from all over the world, possibly both in primary production, processing, and potentially transport, could have value on the market? Or if it would be more valuable just to make sure that cooperatives' impact is taken into consideration by existing certification or labeling schemes as fair trade already do?
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, this was reviewed by the ICA a couple years ago, the potential to establish a cooperative certificate international like ISO standard. And the conclusion was it is a horrible nightmare and extremely complex and actually inefficient to do so. So the main conclusion, although we were quite, as a cooperative movement, reluctant to accept it or endorse it completely, the conclusion was that it's more efficient to go with existing standards, simply because everyone trusts them. And here I can mention something else. From a consumer cooperative perspective, I know that our members, who are technically supermarket chains, they have a huge problem explaining, regardless of which country you're talking about, explaining to the consumer, to their member, that the model is different, that they are the owner, that in a co-op it's different, and it's not just like a private, it's not a marketing scheme, because consumers, their trust is very low for ages. And they think, ah, yeah, you say we're an owner in a co-op, but that's just, yeah, everyone says that in a way. Well, so if you introduce a brand new ISO standard for co-ops, it's probably going to meet the same type of stereotyping or reluctance. So the ICA's view and my individual is that it would be more efficient to go with existing.
Thank you, Todor. Joseph, anything else? Well, we do have we have a question that we received by email.
Here is also one question from Tom Webb.
Okay.
On chat.
So from Tom Webb, he's asking, do cooperatives have to be profitable, or should they focus on being financially sound? This requires a rethinking of the ideas we used to focus on meeting human needs as opposed to greed. We need to stop using capital investor-driven ideas and shift to cooperative ideas, and tools. Cooperative accounting will focus on financial soundness. So I think the question was, cooperatives have to be profitable, or should they focus on being financially sound?
I can take that. because I did mention in my introduction that we still need to be profitable. Yeah, I guess it's the same thing, but a different approaches to it, because without being financially sound, you basically cannot, in the end, have an operating surplus, which you could invest in further developing your activities. Now, if we say that investments can come only from profits, and that mechanism is what did Tom say, capital investor driven ideas, if it is such an idea, then what is the alternative? Now, I think cooperatives are still playing, unfortunately, by the rules of the neoliberal capitalist system, but implementing and approaching it from a cooperative perspective. So they're not working on a cooperative footing, let's say, because the system doesn't work according to the international system doesn't work according to cooperative principles. And there's so much that we can do with these with the current setup and still manage to be competitive, because let's face it, our competitors, they're not always the sustainable ones, they're not always the ethical ones. And coming to the true price of the products, so long as unsustainable and unhealthy food is cheaper, the game is rigged in a way. We have a problem. So if we try to play not by these rules, but by some other rules, I think we stand to lose. But that's my, maybe out of inexperience. I mean, I don't have so long experience, but anyway.
Thank you, Todo. So what next? What happens when we try to look ahead and try to understand not only our challenges, but also our prospects? And for that matter, I would like to invite Mr. Frederick Owens-Sky, Senior Advisor, Consultant, and Agribusiness Senior Expert at International Trade Center, and also Director at Rhodes Business School in South Africa, who has worked extensively on Alliances for Action methodology. Welcome.
Thank you, and good greetings to everybody around the world. I don't have a formal presentation, but some points to draw on the excellent presentations that have come before. I think one of the things I always like to start off with is the context. And I think that even though we've got a whole lot of people in the room today who are experts in cooperatives, I think that I find it empowering to indicate to people what the strength and power of cooperatives are. They're very much part of global value chains. Maybe some of this data is pre-COVID, but over 1 billion people are affiliated with cooperatives. If we consider at a country level, in New Zealand, it accounts for about 1/4 of the gross domestic product, Kenya about 45%, in Spain, it runs into tens of billions of euros. And the reason why cooperatives can be so effective in economic and social development is that they're bound together by a group of people who committed to increasing their buying power, to get market access, to achieve economies of scale. And my own continent, Africa, actually is very organized in relation to cooperatives. Now, to bring it down to a more micro level, and the ITC, the International Trade Center, has been working extensively with cooperatives in various developing countries and emerging economies around the world. And the recipe that we have found for those cooperatives that show the most potential and succeed is that they generally have a catalyst. So there's a champion, there's a governance framework, they have access to market information, there's social impact. And if we look at the governance framework, the strong points about that is that they're very often democratic, that there are checks and balances, and that there's strong leadership. So despite the challenges of COVID-19 and all that we've heard about, what we're finding is that these cooperatives have shown themselves to be resilient because of the factors that actually enabled them to band together and to be cooperatives that actually are sustainable. Now, just a couple of examples from the countries that we work in. One is in Ghana, where Kuapa Koku association. We work with about 100,000 members, primarily smallholders, who represent 10% of the cocoa production in Ghana. And again, the resilience factor has come through. So what we found, and some of it is anecdotal because I think it's still too close to COVID-19, but it's something that we'll be looking at a lot closer to get empirical data to actually confirm anecdotally what we found up until now, is that number one, with these cooperatives that we worked with, is that they've got economic sustainability. Now, some of that has been driven by the fact that there's intercropping, there's diversification, and so during COVID, they were actually able to pivot. They weren't solely reliant on cocoa in terms of livelihood. Secondly, in relation to environmental sustainability, the sort of dynamic, talk about agroforestry approach to fertilizers and pesticides, because we promote a much more sustainable approach, they've actually been less reliant on global value chains for fertilizers. So again, it demonstrates the kind of resilience of a sustainability mindset. And then from the point of view of social sustainability, these cocoa beans are fair trade certified. So there's a fair price. Yes, a premium is bought in. And I really like Todor's. There's so many things in Todor that really resonated with what it is that we think is important. But what we found through that is that those buyers and consumers are very loyal. So, I think, and it's not just about, this is not charity, because ultimately the approach is really around commercial sustainability as well. There has to be a sunset. It's about dignity and respect. And it's about giving all the players in the cooperative along the value chain the opportunity to actually create a sustainable organization, whatever we want to call it, that's committed to achieving what it is that we laid out at the start. And Toto, I'd like to go back to you and say, we agree optimizing is not the right word, but maybe we could use a term like satisficing, for example. If we can find a model that satisfies us and we can get the just transition. And so the ITC's approach, we have 5 pillars around what we call understand, convene, transform, invest, and impact. And what we really see with this is that it's really about creating those opportunities, understanding what the market is. It's a market-driven approach. Ultimately, it's a global value chain. You're having to understand what those market dynamics are. Then the convening process is very inclusive, where you have to get all the stakeholders together. And that's really around the governance, as we spoke about. Then the transform part is really about allowing the peer-to-peer learning. It becomes a virtuous circle. And that as you begin to build the capacity and the stakeholders and the public-private linkages start developing, we find it becomes self-reinforcing, and they start learning from one another, and they start building on the successes. Then the investment part is very important, and we've seen that particularly where there's co-investment. We've had some great success stories linking to international buyers like Max Aguilar, and there's this co-investment. Because ultimately it's a global value chain. We can't ignore the realities of liberal capitalism. There has to be a return on, but again, as we say, if the focus is around satisfying the social impact, and often these cooperatives start not because of a commercial mindset, but because there's a need in the community. And if the community is able to see that doing that leads to the social purpose and mandate, that in itself actually fosters the kind of investment that's needed. And then lastly, it's around the impact. And what we found is that if you actually measure the impact and you communicate it, then in itself is very powerful. And the people that are involved in the cooperative are hungry. They want to see, what is this doing for us? What is it that we need to do in order to make decisions? Then in relation to the project in Ethiopia, what we found there is that through the embracing digitalization and technology, smart climate approaches, this is incredibly important. We've lived through COVID, but I think we all know that what's coming in terms of climate change, if it's not already here, the energy crisis, and it's not just around gas and electricity, it's around water. It's many, many things. So we have to apply the multiple capital framework around natural capital, social capital. And so when one brings that mindset to, we find that there's a natural inclination to want to diversify as well. So what we find with these cooperatives is that it does foster an entrepreneurial mindset that even extends into social entrepreneurship, but then it becomes easier to diversify and to add on other products too, because there's that willingness to be innovative and you're hungry to learn. So I appreciate I only had 5 minutes, Marab, so I think I'll stop there. And obviously happy to take any questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's see, do we have any additional questions, Joseph?
So far, we don't have additional questions unless maybe there is.
Okay.
No, that one. Spanish has no question. So for now, we don't have additional questions from the chat.
We have, we have a question regarding the participation of youth in the process of management. Let's see.
Yeah, that's if I can pick up on that, obviously, and I think from the perspective of particularly farmers, and we have to acknowledge that if we don't have farmers, then we don't have food, we don't have a sustainable food system, and we know around the world that young people are not really excited about the thought of being farmers. They often migrate to the cities and they're looking for other career options. So we certainly found that where we put in interventions to excite youth and provide those opportunities, but from a policy point of view and advocacy point of view, we have to do a lot more there, absolutely. And I think that through SDG 17 cooperation and finding ways to provide the kind of evidence and to demonstrate to youth that actually it's smart farming, in terms of smart cities and including youth in that, it's essential to our well-being. And I think that the potential for them meeting many, many aspirations, they're tech savvy, they want to learn, because of the nature of the cooperative, it doesn't have to be a single value chain, draws on multiple products, it provides many exciting options. But yes, youth are critical and we need to do a lot more to bring them in and encourage them to be part of this.
Thank you. So before we go to work, because I do believe that we have
Maybe before you proceed, there is another question that has come up. Somebody is asking, Muhammad Hussein is asking, how should we move and with what appropriate strategy? How should we move ahead and with what appropriate strategy? That's the question he has asked. So it's not quite clear.
Thank you, Owen, for a very, very interesting presentation. If I may, I could have one question for Owen. I wonder, how do you choose the cooperatives who can be part of your projects?
Sorry, Marjaana, you just broke up a little bit there. I missed the middle part of the question. How do you choose
the cooperatives that can be part of your projects?
How do we choose?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, look, that's a difficult question, and I don't think it's as simple as just saying we choose. So often the way that we work is a request comes from a country in order for us to render the kind of technical assistance and capacity building. But having said that, we really go through a 6-step process. And one of that is, the first step is around understanding the comparative and competitive advantages. This is technical. You can't move away from the fact that a a cooperative is a system. And that system, you need to work with the system, and the system can be improved. And the system isn't always going to find its way by itself. So this is why we need to have interventions and policies and all of that in place. But having said that, yes, I think there are ways that one can address in an objective way what are the comparative and competitive advantages that exist. Then you have to bring in the international buyer perspective. As we said, these are global value chains, and it's really around managing expectations. So we need to be sure again that whoever is going to actually be part of this process has the capacity to understand what it means to operate in a global context. Now, they're not left to their own devices in that regard. And so through the A4A approach, where there is this understand and convening process, we find that the more we invest in that inclusive dialogue up front, the more likely we're going to get the inclusive growth that comes later on. So, and the focus is very much around building the capacity and capability in the country, because the sooner we're out of there, the more successful and effective that we've been. So, but having said that, it's not in and out, but it's really the vision and aspiration that we apply. Then, fourthly, is around the upgrading opportunities. So now what we find is that not everybody always buys into that. So by now, those that have come on the journey, they're now beginning to see that this is what needs to be done, because at the end, as we said, it's really around, it's still the commercial dynamics. You still have to meet international standards. You still have to ensure that quality, HACCP certification, all of those things, good agricultural practices. And I realize I'm focusing just on agriculture here, but I think those lessons can be translated into other value chains and sectors. Then the fifth step is around the industry governance, or the sector governance. And those cooperatives that have a strong governance structure are ultimately the ones that are really going to succeed. So if the challenges around governance, and very often there's mistrust between the public and the private sector, and there's rent seeking, as it's called, and we really want to be sure that the cooperatives that are involved are really there because they want to act in the best interest of the cooperative. And that might mean that they have to develop a bit of patience. So, we've got techniques and methods that we use in order to assist in that kind of governance. And then lastly, we have to ensure that there's policy alignment and priorities. So this is where, from our perspective, public-private dialogue is really, really important. So ultimately, there are many actors in this value chain, and there has to be that kind of alignment. So it's not a quick thing. What we also know is that cooperatives are very diverse. There's not one size fits all. So on a long answer to a short question, but I hope I've given it some justice.
Thank you, Owen. Definitely a very good answer. I don't know if this question is suitable for you, but we have a question. How will workplace coop migrate from thrift and loan system to an effective business coop? How will workplace coop migrate from thrift and loan system to an effective business coop?
So that's not, I can't say that that's my direct area of expertise, but I think just my perception and perspective on that is that you have to have a stake. So if at any point in time, certain players in the cooperative don't see that actually everybody's in this together, obviously you need finance. So there have been examples where cooperatives have succeeded without getting any kind of external financing. They do it from their internal, but ultimately, as we said, there still has to be some commercial mindset. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is, and I think you can delegate responsibility if you have a proper governance structure, and that way one can move away from the survivalist sort of then the thrift and loan to ultimately one that thrives, that generates its own resources, that can go and develop as we heard before, the concerns around the capital model. But I think what we found in the world today is that there are many options, and at least if people are informed and they educate, and that's really the investing part of AFI approach, is that we try to bring all the opportunities for the cooperative members to understand what options they have, and then provide a mechanism for them to choose fairly and understand that there's always going to be advantages and disadvantages and consequences. But at least if you're informed and you make the right decision, then you get the stakeholder buy-in that's needed.
And then there's also maybe related to the previous question and the participation of women in production processes. That was maybe related to the question, how do you choose the cooperatives for your projects?
Again, women, absolutely. Women, we heard earlier about gender-based violence, something that still blights our society. It's not country specific. But women who are empowered, business. There are many success stories. I've come across many success stories of women who are empowered, and by doing so, they make decisions that are in the best interest of their family. But ultimately, we also can't leave men out of the equation. I think it's a complex thing, but where you have economic development and social development, and one understands that ultimately, if society acknowledges that that we all in this together, so the ITC's approach is very much to include women. One has to actually have a strategy to do that. One has to be proactive and plan for it, so that ultimately, the commitment to the inclusive growth is there. And ultimately, if we don't have that a just way of doing it, then in itself, that cooperative is not going to be effective either. So let me stop there. I don't want to monopolize this now, so hopefully other people can come in. Thanks.
Thank you very much. As we can see the topic and and its implication on not only on our daily life, but on the prospects of our future development, not only as single co-ops, but as parts of whether a chain or a system leading from farm to table eventually. These questions really include many other issues that not only cooperative movement and single cooperatives are dealing with, but also international bodies and countries themselves are dealing with are dealing with gender equality, equal opportunity, inclusive economy, and all the possibilities that are open and should be open in order to enable a stable and sustainable economy and society. But time limits us and will not enable us to continue digging in and widening our scope. So I would like to use this opportunity to thank all our participants, our panelists, and our presenters. And with this, I would like to give the floor, Hans, if you would like to wrap it up and give some last comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mirav. Well, I think it has been a very rich discussion this afternoon, but it also showed that, well, it's such a broad topic, right? So you touch upon everything almost, like any other topic. It's all connected, global value chains with all the aspects that have been mentioned during the presentations. So It's very difficult for me to wrap it up or to summarize some main conclusions, but the takeaway is, I would say, that much more focus is needed globally, not just on behalf of cooperatives, on global value chains and what's happening in there. So in terms of how people are treated, in terms of the sustainability of these global value chains, in terms of what is the impact of climate change, energy transition, you name it actually. So it's very difficult for me to formulate some takeaways, but I think that it will need to follow up work. Anyway, we all know that it's highly complicated as well, and it touches upon many issues, and these issues were represented today. And that was already very illuminating, I think very illustrative and well, interesting and relevant for many of us. So also on my behalf, I would like to thank Merav and Marjaana for their work in this respect, taking this incredible and very laborious task to dive into the world of global value chains. Again, this is so all-encompassing, so wide, so broad, that it's hardly doable, obviously, to conclude this one way or the other within well, a considerable time span. But I also would like to thank the presenters for the different perspectives on this issue with well, practical cases. That's also very illuminating, but also the more general picture when looking at it from a different, more somewhat higher abstraction level at this issue. So I think everything has been discussed this afternoon, but it also says again, well, it's a very broad topic, and well, we don't finish the discussion here, I'm afraid. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans. And again, thank you all for taking part in this webinar. As Joseph has mentioned in the chat, all presentations will be shared with participants, as well as the recording. And we would like to invite you to our future events as well. Keep reading ICA emails and welcome. Thank you very much.